Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's Keeper Security webinar on Zero Trust KeeperPAM, a unified cloud platform. I'm Lauren Clark, Senior Customer Marketing Manager here at Keeper, and I'm joined by our CTO and co-founder, Craig Lurey. Craig, where are you joining from today?
Hey, everybody. I'm in our office in El Dorado Hills, California.
Awesome. I'm joining from North Carolina. If you would like to put where you're joining from in the chat. For everyone joining live, our webinar is being held in Livestorm. There is a chat function, a questions tab, and a links section as well. So in the webinar, when you have questions for Craig, please put them in the questions section so we can keep track, and our team behind the scenes can help assist answer those as well. Today's webinar will automatically be recorded and sent out to everyone once the webinar concludes, so you can rewatch and share with colleagues, and we can go ahead and get started. Go to the next slide. Today's webinar has 3 raffle prizes. They will be selected at random at the end of the webinar, and the winners will be put in the chat. We are raffling off 1 pair of AirPods Max and 2 $100 Amazon gift cards. So stay tuned to the end to see if you win, and I will be contacting the winners via email after the webinar concludes as well. This is a final reminder as everyone is joining today to put your questions in the questions tab so we can keep track of them, and our team behind the scenes can answer those for you. And we will also be interrupting Craig during the demo if the questions aren't answered throughout the demo as well. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it back off to Craig.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everybody for joining. So I'm Craig Lurey. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Keeper Security. And today we'll be going through a new product called KeeperPAM. And this now is in preview. So I'll be going through the preview version of the software, and all of this is now available in preview. It's available on our website, so I'll show you how to sign up and get access to this, and also how to activate the functionality. So what is KeeperPAM? KeeperPAM is a modern zero trust and zero knowledge platform for managing infrastructure, which includes things like servers, applications, databases, and any workload in the cloud or on-prem. And I'll go through the security model, the encryption model of the application, but it is just like everything we do on Keeper Security. It is full zero knowledge, end-to-end encrypted, and Keeper does not have any access to customer information. The KeeperPAM platform encompasses several aspects. So what you'll see in this demo today is we'll go through all of the areas of the product, which include, of course, our core product of password management, enterprise password management, secrets management, which includes things like integrations into third-party systems, CI/CD tools, as well as zero trust network access, which I will show you includes things like accessing desktops, remote systems, infrastructure, databases, some new tunneling capabilities within the product. Remote browser isolation is also included, and this provides access to web-based applications, internal applications, as well as cloud applications. And then this is all managed through the admin console and control plane. So this is everything from policy enforcement to event logs, SIM integration, and risk management. So a unique thing about this platform is that it's fully embedded into the core product. So all of these capabilities are deployed through the Keeper Vault and the Keeper admin console for users. The core capabilities of the platform, as we just discussed: password management, secrets, browser isolation, session management. So I'll talk about privileged sessions, session recording, session playback. All of this capabilities are through the Keeper Vault and through the Keeper admin console deployed to users, very easy to deploy. And the admin console manages all of the policies. The core benefits of KeeperPAM: being able to access and manage and protect not just passwords and secrets, but also now protecting access to infrastructure. So we call that a resource. So any resource could include machines, databases, directories, endpoints, applications, any system, any infrastructure, both on-prem and in the cloud. So in terms of cloud management, Keeper works with any AWS or Azure or any third-party cloud infrastructure provider. And it also works with any self-hosted on-prem environments. A key aspect of this is, of course, with Keeper, you are enforcing policy, enforcing access to access the vault, to access your secrets, and now to access your infrastructure. And so you can enforce MFA on resources that don't necessarily have MFA built in. So you MFA into your Keeper vault, you authenticate, you use encryption, strong encryption to protect the assets, and everything is controlled and managed through Keeper. And automated password rotation is part of the platform. So automated rotation has been part of our secrets manager for quite a while, but now this is all kind of built together where now you have infrastructure management, automated rotation, all built into the same UI. Now for users who are accessing it, what you'll notice is very easy to access. So you just deploy the Keeper Vault. It integrates with your single sign-on, just like Keeper's enterprise password manager. So it's all one platform. So we'll integrate with any single sign-on, whether it's Azure, Okta, Ping, anything. It will now, of course, remove credentials on local machines. That's a really key aspect here. So there's no more managing of SSH keys or credentials. Nothing is local on your machine. If you were doing that in the past with, let's say, accessing infrastructure. So that's history when it comes to using Keeper. So now with this platform, everything is managed inside of the vault. It's all encrypted, and you don't have to store things locally on your machine. And with this platform, you do not have to deploy a VPN. You do not have to deploy another ZTNA solution. You just deploy the vault to your users, and all of the capabilities are embedded directly in the Keeper Vault. So we'll go through the process of using this. We'll do a live demo of the product. I'll go through all of the areas. Now, some people who are joining this webinar today, of course, there's a lot of customers who are on this, and also people who are not yet using Keeper. So I'll make sure to cover just some basics of accessing and deploying the platform. So that's really the first thing, is deploying the Keeper Vault to users. The vault is how you'll access your resources, how you'll access sessions, and how you'll manage permissions to those resources as well. So you just deploy it like you normally would with Keeper through your identity provider. You can provision through SCIM, which most of our customers on the enterprise side will deploy through SCIM or provision through SCIM. And then you'll set policy. So activating and enforcing MFA, all the other policies will go through based on job responsibility. The Keeper Gateway, as I'll go through, is primarily responsible for establishing those zero trust connections into the target environments that you're managing, and therefore you'll deploy the Keeper Gateway into each of those environments. And then from our applications and our apps, you'll be able to discover. So there is a discovery piece that's involved in this launch, and of course connect and manage those resources. So I'll jump into the product. Really quickly, just to talk about the infrastructure. So you'll see here, this documentation now is live, so you can access the KeeperPAM documentation. So we'll provide some links here. And our new web page is also live, that's showcasing the product. The first thing I wanted to talk about is architecture. And it's important to kind of understand how this is deployed. So starting from the beginning, of course, you've got the Keeper Vault, and this is, all of your users are going to authenticate into the vault using MFA, SSO, biometrics, passkeys, whatever it is they're using to authenticate into the product. And on the infrastructure side, you'll deploy the Keeper Gateway service. So this is supporting Docker and this is kind of a new thing for us on this gateway product, is that you can deploy through Docker, which is recommended solution, as well as there's gateways that can be installed on Windows servers as well as Linux. So you deploy that to each of your networks that you're managing, and the infrastructure that Keeper can control and manage and access and control access to are these infrastructure environments. So AWS, Azure, local environments, servers, machines, databases, directories, user accounts, service accounts. And so when you deploy this, there's an outbound connection that's established between the Keeper Vault and the Keeper Cloud. And likewise, there's an outbound connection that's created from the Keeper Gateway to the Keeper Cloud. And I keep saying outbound because that's an important aspect of the security here, is that you don't have to open firewalls, you don't have to open any ingress into the infrastructure. This is purely outbound connections that are established from the gateway. And then on the infrastructure side, the Keeper Gateway speaks native protocols, agentless, we call it. So you've got agentless protocols from the Keeper Gateway to the target infrastructure. And that's really important because you don't have to deploy any agents. There's nothing that has to be run on your infrastructure itself. The Keeper Gateway, which is installed into your network, is just requiring line of sight access to the infrastructure, or if it's talking about AWS or Azure APIs that it can use. So Keeper will utilize role-based instance profiles. So it allows you to control AWS infrastructure, let's say with the instance role permission, and the same thing with Azure. So it'll utilize APIs when possible. Otherwise, it can also use those native protocols. So an end-to-end encryption is created between the Keeper Vault and the destination infrastructure. So depending on the use case, we'll talk about sessions, tunneling, remote browser isolation, password rotation. All of that is end-to-end encrypted. So Keeper does not have, we don't have access to the session. We're not man in the middling this. We are not getting involved in the actual communication between the vault and the infrastructure. We are establishing that end-to-end encryption, and the Keeper Gateway, which is hosted by you in your environment, is responsible for a lot of the encryption and decryption of secrets, communication to the infrastructure. We just activate that capability through our platform. So that's the architecture of the tool. And again, if there's any questions, do post them. And if there's people are asking several things, I'll make sure to answer them for everybody. Okay, so in terms of components, there's a few components that we'll go through today. So of course, we've got the Keeper desktop application, which I will open in a little bit. We've got the Keeper admin console is a core component, and the Keeper Vault, which we are going to load up in the Vault preview. So one thing you'll see in the documentation is that these are all pointing to the preview version. So it's Vault/preview and console/preview. So as I described, really the main thing is getting this deployed. So you as the admin, you can sign in through Keeper, typically through a single sign-on provider, like I'll be doing. And in my case, I'm using Azure, and I'm using a hardware key for authentication. You can also enforce MFA, and in my case, I'm enforcing a YubiKey FIDO2 Web authentication also on the Keeper side. So that's actually kind of a unique thing about our platform, is that you can enforce MFA on the identity provider and on the Keeper side. So from the Keeper admin console, this is where you're going to deploy the Vault. And a lot of you are familiar with this, and I'll just kind of jump into where things are different in this new platform. So when you deploy Keeper, the main thing is that when you're deploying to, let's say, a lot of users through, let's say, Azure. So in my environment, I've got a lot of different identity providers. So with Keeper, you can have different IDPs with different groups of users, different divisions, departments. In my case, I'm going to go into this node, which I call Azure. And this has all my users who are deployed through Azure. I've got role policies that are applied to these users, and this general Azure user here in this example is the default role policy. I have provisioning set up for these users. They're going to authenticate with Azure, and that's just for the SAML 2.0 authentication. And then for provisioning, I've got it set up with SCIM provisioning. So all of the management of users is all done through Azure in this case, and it's going to push those identities over to Keeper. It's very easy to sign up. You can do just-in-time provisioning, and users can then authenticate into their vault using their identity provider. Now, in terms of PAM capabilities, I'll talk about how you're going to activate this and how you'll use this from the console side. So in my environment, I'll go back to the root node. And in this case, I've got new policies that I've created. So you'll see here, I've got the administrator, of course, Keeper administrator, which is the default policy for the first admin in the platform. I've got this other one called PAM admins. So I've created a policy specifically for administrators of the privileged access capabilities. And we would recommend, just in terms of best practices, that you have an admin role that's specific to privileged access. And under the enforcement policies, you'll see this new privileged access manager section. And this replaces what used to be the secrets manager policies. And in the privileged access manager policies, this is going to cover different aspects of PAM, which include the creation of applications, and I'll go into that within the Vault side, the ability to deploy gateways to either Docker, Windows, or Linux environments, managing rotation of credentials, so both configuration and also performing those rotations. Keeper Connection Manager, which is now built into the Vault. You'll be able to control the ability to create these connections, launching them, also viewing session recordings. And these are for those interactive sessions. We call those connections. Tunnels, which is a TCP/IP based encrypted tunnel that's created from the Keeper desktop application to the target infrastructure. That's an option that people can use for connections. And those can be configured and started by the user. Also, remote browser isolation. So we separate out browser isolation, creating browsing sessions, launching sessions, and also viewing those RBI recordings. Discovery, I'll show you, is built in. There's a discovery piece through Commander, and also we are in the process of getting the UI out for that as well. So the policies are then enabled for those admins, and typically we would recommend that you have another role, let's say for PAM end users, and these people in the organization, let's say, are responsible for having access to the infrastructure. So if it's assigned to them, and I'll show how that works, but those, let's say in this case, I have the PAM end users can just launch connections, start tunnels, and perform browser isolation. Other areas of the admin console which are new for this release, you'll see on the left side the connection manager. So secrets manager and connection manager, they kind of go together here. So secrets manager is going to cover all of the events and logs related to machines, resources, secrets that are being accessed, rotations, automated scheduled rotations of credentials. That's all covered here. Now, connections cover all of the PAM related activities, such as establishing remote sessions. You can see here the different protocols. So RDP, browser isolation, SSH, databases, MySQL, and so on. So we do support a lot of different protocols. And again, these are native protocols from the gateway to the target infrastructure. And we'll track and monitor all of those types of events. So if a connection with session recording, let's say, has started, you'll see these events related to that. And here's an event that says, Craig created a connection through the web app to a particular endpoint using a particular protocol. So again, these can be reported on directly within the Keeper admin console, or you can go to the reporting and alerts section, and you can push these to your SIM provider. So you can then set this up to go automatically to your preferred provider. So if you're sending this to Splunk, you set up the collector, and all of the event logs are going to be shipped automatically to those SIM providers. Okay, so that was the admin console, kind of the main differences there. And so now that you've deployed the Vault to users, users can access it through either the web vault or the desktop application. We're first going to start off actually on the web vault. So I'll jump into the Keeper web vault, and again, we'll focus on using this Azure account. And so I've got an active session, so I'm just going to MFA into my vault, and it loads all of my resources. Now, in terms of structure, in your vault, of course, you've got things like folders that are private to you. Let's say this folder here, or like my business applications. Of course, all the standard stuff that you would store in your vault and have access, to you privately, as well as to shared folders. And so another example of like a shared folder, let's say this AWS folder, I have this shared among a team. I've got an AWS team and secrets managers. So now with KeeperPAM, you have the capability of storing not just secrets and passwords, but also storing and managing resources. So in this example here in my demo environment, I've got a few different environments. I've got AWS, Canada Central, EU West. I've also got an Azure environment. And so let's say, for example, in my AWS US West environment, I've got a few different shared folders. So here, I've split up our shared folders into 3 folders. And this is really kind of best practice for this type of deployment. And the way that I have this set up is, let's just first start off with the resources folder. So the resources in this shared folder are shared to, let's say, the PAM users. And I'm also sharing this folder to some applications. So with Keeper, you can share, of course, to the human users, and you can also share to third-party applications and systems. So in this case, I've got this administrative folder, and this is shared to the PAM administrators. But in this case here, I've got the resources that are going to be accessed. I've got this shared to some PAM users. Now, how this relates to infrastructure and applications and gateways, I'll get to in a second. But within these folders here to represent these resources, I've got them broken down into other folders. So for example, some databases like MongoDB or a MySQL database, or I've got directories, machines, things like Windows servers, Linux servers, and so on. So these new record types are allowing you to store and manage these resources within the vault directly. Now, how is this set up? Before I get into some of the session stuff, the really key thing here is that resources are assigned to applications. So you assign an application to a folder of resources, and an application, what's an application? So over here on Secrets Manager, here's where we define our applications. So an application can represent, it's basically like a container that represents folders and records that it can access. It represents devices and also gateways. So in this case, I have a gateway deployed to my KeeperPAM, to my US West region. I've got one here to my EU West, and also like a Canada environment, also my Azure environment. So each of these has its own gateway that's running, and each of these has different access to certain folders within the vault. So the application defines this. It defines what those resources gateways and devices can access within the vault. So those gateways can therefore only access and decrypt secrets that it needs from those folders. We also have this new resource called a PAM configuration. And a PAM configuration is really also a record in the vault at the end of the day, but what it does is determine what environment the Keeper gateway is running. It's going to be a one-to-one correlation basically between a Keeper gateway and a PAM configuration. And the PAM configuration allows you to activate different capabilities within that environment. So for example, in this AWS Canada Central, I've got rotation, connections, tunneling, session recording all activated. In this case, I'm using instance role policy. So my gateway that I've deployed is inheriting a particular role within AWS. And also same thing here with Azure. Now the difference in this Azure environment is that you'll see that for setting up this Azure environment, I've created a configuration which includes things like client secrets and tenant IDs. So the configuration will define where that gateway is installed and what permissions it has to be able to access that infrastructure. For, let's say, an on-prem type of environment, in this case, I have a local network configuration, and this one is also doing session recording and connections and so on, but it's using a on-prem environment. I've got a CIDR defined, and so it'll use the CIDR for things like discovery. And I've assigned a network ID, which is used also in the discovery process. So the PAM configuration kind of works with applications and gateways, and this is how you will deploy the product, deploy the resources in these environments. So when you're inside of the vault and you're creating, let's say, deploying a gateway, you can simply do that by clicking on Create New, and you'll click on Gateway. And from here, you can just simply assign the gateway a name, and you can then, let's say, for example, I want to call it, my infrastructure. And Keeper will then automatically create all the resources that you need to set up and stand up this environment. Now, a really cool thing about this is I can just say, I want to create some example records, and this will generate a full environment for me, a sandbox that contains resources like Linux servers, Windows machines, and all of that. It'll create these resources for you and generate this all automatically. So I can just click on Next, and then Keeper will automatically build the gateway. It'll create the application. It'll create the configuration. It'll also create example records. And this allows you to very quickly set up a test environment, stand up the features, be able to play around with connections, tunneling, all the rotations, and all those capabilities. So this is all built in when you create this. Now, in this case, it's providing me a Docker Compose and another file, which is called the seccomp file, which you need to download. So you just click to download them. And once I can download them, I am now able to just fire up and create a gateway. So from there, it creates these folders in your vault. And now I've already got this all set up. I've got some resources. I've got SSH machines. I've got VNC. I've got some user accounts that can just be automatically set up and rotated. So I won't go through that piece of it, but this at least shows you how easy it is to create an environment. Now, for an existing environment, I'll go through just to demonstrate some of the core features of KeeperPAM. So starting off, of course, with sessions and session management. So in my environment, I'm using this US West, and I've got a whole bunch of machines that I'm going to connect to. So from the vault, I can just look at here. This is a Windows server that I'm managing, and the protocol is RDP. And I can just launch directly into those. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a whole bunch of these for the demo here. So I'm going to launch into an SSH Linux server, also a different Linux machine actually using RDP protocol. I've got an SSH server, Rocky Linux, and also a VNC connection to a different Linux machine. So I can launch these directly from the vault, and when they come up, like this one here, this is that Windows server. I can actually interact with this remote session directly from the vault. So what you're seeing here is a projection from the Keeper Gateway. So the Keeper Gateway, which you installed into your cloud environment or on-prem, is establishing a agentless connection to the target, in this case, the Windows server using RDP. And it's projecting that using that end-to-end encrypted tunnel through the Keeper vault. And I'm interacting here directly in the vault. So this session can be moved around here within my vault. It's all encapsulated within the Keeper vault. And I can also go to like a full screen mode. So full screen takes up the width of the window. I can resize this. I can even go into, you know, full monitor mode. So when you launch these sessions, it also creates this session dock directly here on the lower left of the screen. So this session dock allows me to access all of my active connections. So this was, of course, the Windows machine. I can go over to, let's say, the Linux, in this case, the Rocky Linux version. So any SSH session, I can just interact directly here. And I've got another example of another SSH device and a Linux machine using RDP, another Linux machine that's using VNC that allows me to connect through any desktop protocol. So we support, you know, RDP, VNC, any desktop native protocol, SSH, as well as databases. So those kind of represent some desktops. Now on the database side of things, we also support a few different ways to connect to databases. So one way is through the use of the Keeper native protocol support for, let's see, MySQL. I'll open MySQL. I'll also open up Postgres, and yeah, so we'll actually stick to MySQL and Postgres. So on the MySQL side, it gives me essentially a MySQL CLI. So from here, I can just interact directly within that database. Now, this is just one method of connecting. And so these are where we support specifically a protocol to project directly into the vault. So we support MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, and others. And that's, you know, a very specific capability to connect to either, you know, Postgres or MySQL directly through the CLI. So that's one method. The other method of accessing a database is using remote browser isolation. So in my environment here, I've also got some web apps that are embedded. So I'll go through a few of these, but a really cool use case for this is accessing any infrastructure through those native web UIs. So in this case, this is just Google, and I can access this web application. Now in this case of the Google example, I've got this specifically set up to limit access. So if I try to go outside of Google, I will get denied. So you can lock in access to very specific sites and applications. I can also access web UIs for those databases. So if I don't want to use the command line CLI capabilities of Keeper, I can also access the visual front ends for these databases. So in this case, this is a tool called WhoDB, which is integrated with Keeper. So it allows you to explore a database that is directly connected. So here I'm using a web UI that's projected from the Keeper gateway that's directly accessing and managing those resources, in this case a MySQL database, and I can do everything I need to do, run queries and so on. Same thing goes for things like Postgres pgadmin. So no matter what tool you're using to manage that database or that infrastructure or that firewall UI or any web admin tool, that can all be managed directly here through the remote browser isolation capability. So in this case, I want to manage access to, let's say, this database, and I can do a query on the database, whatever I need to do, and I can run that. So, at the end of the day, really powerful capability to be able to project these secure web UIs through the Keeper Vault and be able to manage that infrastructure directly through the Vault. Now, of course, none of these secrets are locally on my machine. They're all managed through Keeper, and these sessions are completely eliminating the need for any sort of secrets or credentials to be able to access them. Okay, just in terms of how this is set up, one of the key aspects of this new KeeperPAM capability is what we call linked credentials. So in this case, let's take, for example, this Windows Server 2019. So I am connecting to this one as we had here. I have this connection open. I'm connecting as the administrator. So what you'll see here is this linked credential. So in this model, the resource that we're connecting to or managing does not directly embed the credentials into this resource. And this is done very specifically. So it allows you to separate the resource from the credential. So in this case, I've got this Windows Server Administrator, and this is in a different folder. So I've separated out the actual secrets or credentials or keys, anything that's needed, and this is separated into a different folder with different permissions. So in this case, this Windows Server credential is in this KeeperPAM accounts folder, which is going to be limited to only administrators who require access to this. This is not provided to the end users. And these PAM user records, as you see here, can be managed and rotated. As you see, I've got, this is being rotated every day at 7 a.m. When I go into this resource, this user account, I can go in and set up rotation settings. So this particular resource is a service account on a machine. It's rotated every day at 7 a.m. And I can get pretty specific about how often it's rotated. I can set up custom schedules. I can set up cron specs. So this allows me to get very specific to how often that secret is rotated. So rotation can be set up on any type of resource. This could be on a SSH key. It could be on a SQL database. It could be any target infrastructure, any database type, and you can do them on a scheduled basis, or you can set them up to on demand. So if I need to rotate this SQL user account password, I can just do it on demand. It'll reach out from the Keeper gateway to that target infrastructure. It'll rotate that password and update the vault and any shared users on that as well. So going back into the actual machines on this Windows server, kind of getting into how you link up credentials and how you control PAM settings. Inside of the record, you see I've got this administrative credential that's linked, and I've got PAM settings. And PAM settings will control what the environment is. So I can select the configuration. I can select the credentials that are used for, let's say, that connection. And I can also activate different protocols. So in this case, I've got RDP that's accessed, and I can enable that connection. I've got graphical session recording that's enabled, and the connection port to that target from the gateway to the target is port 3389. I can also activate a tunnel. So the tunnel, if activated, would be a local tunnel from the local machine through localhost that's created from the local host all the way to the target gateway, through the gateway to the target machine over a particular port. So in this case, I have tunnel activated. And one of the reasons for this separation of resource from credentials, a really key area, is the ability to, of course, share. So if you're going to provision access to a particular system or application, then you would want to provide access securely without having to share the credential to another user. So just like everything in Keeper, you can share if you have the permissions established. I can go ahead and, for example, share this record. So let's say I want to share access to this Windows server. I'm going to open two different screens here. So one of them is logged in as Alice. So I've got Alice on the right side, who's logged into the vault under their account, and I've got me as the admin on the left side. So if I want to provide access to this Windows server to Alice, I can just do that just as I normally would with any other sharing. So I can share by the team level at the shared folder, or I can share an individual. So you see what just happened. I shared that. I can also share, let's say, a web-based interface if I want to do that. So all of these can be directly shared to another recipient. I'll go ahead and also share a Linux machine to Alice. Now, just like everything with Keeper, you can also assign time-limited access. So if I want this access to expire after a certain amount of time, so I'll just go into this Windows server, and I want this to expire after 5 minutes. So access will expire, and it also revokes that session. On the Alice side, of course, I've now got access to this server, and it just appears in Alice's vault. And Alice can also go ahead and launch into this target as well as the other targets. So just like everything with Keeper, you can share it. And so now on Alice's side, Alice can create this encrypted session to this target. And it's all available to Alice now directly on their vault. So I can interact with this target, do whatever I need to do. And let's say I'm going to, delete something. Okay, whatever. So now what happens on the controlling side? So access is going to expire automatically in 5 minutes, but let's just say I want to kill access right away for Alice. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove Alice's access, remove them from the resource, and immediately the session is killed and the session is expired. And I'm just going to go ahead and remove access for this one as well. So access is removed and those resources are immediately deleted from the target. So let's just say that I want to monitor what happened. What did Alice do? What did they access? So nice thing about this is all built in is session recording and playback. So here in the vault, I open up that Windows server and I go to the session recordings. And I see a session recording that took place from Alice. I can play it back and see exactly what Alice did. So this includes both visual logs as well as keystroke logs. So this is all configured at the resource level. You can do this with not just Windows servers, but also SSH, RBI sessions, browser isolation sessions. Everything supports this session recording and session playback capability. So these important thing to note about the session recordings, it's all encrypted. So the Keeper gateway, which is of course establishing those sessions to the infrastructure, the Keeper gateway is encrypting that session in real time. And those sessions, those encrypted sessions are stored on the Keeper cloud. And then when you as the administrator or you as someone who has access to view session recordings goes and plays those back, these are going to be decrypted locally on the device here. So these are stored in a particular way, which is basically tracking changes on the screen. So it's not really a video. What it is it's generating this video based on screen movements and differences that occur. I'm going to pause for a second and find out if there's any kind of immediate questions that people are asking that I need to answer.
Yes, we have a bunch of questions that are coming through. Our team is answering those. We have one that says, are you able to show how the gateway would be configured within an environment and what is needed for it to connect to services within the network?
Yeah, actually, so we've got a few minutes. I can sort of show how that would work. So one thing I'll point to is on the documentation, under the getting started here, there is a whole section on the Keeper Gateway right here. So when you deploy the gateway, and I would recommend using Docker for this. It's really up to you, but it is sort of based on the platform. And we highlight kind of what are the capabilities depending on the platform. But typically, let's say you're pushing out a Docker install. You can start up this container, and this gateway just simply needs access to whatever protocol on that target. And let's say, take for example, an AWS environment. So in an AWS environment, you can simply set up the gateway onto an instance which is using role policy. So we have a document here on the AWS environment setup, and this goes kind of through the policy. So this is an example. So let's say you want that gateway to be able to establish connections, perform rotation, and discover users, and discover IAM users. Well, in that case, I would then set a policy in AWS that provided that gateway running on that instance with these policies. So it has the ability to, for example, in this case, it can rotate credentials of a database. It can look at all the EC2 instances. It can discover machines. It can discover databases. And it can also list out and discover the IAM users. So it really depends on what features you're looking for on the PAM, what type of resources you want to manage. Then you would apply that policy to that Keeper gateway. As long as it has the policy, then it has the ability to look up those resources and manage those resources. So we would recommend that, of course, you're going to limit those resources. You're not going to necessarily say resources star. You can control what resources that KeeperPAM has access to. And the same thing with your Azure environment. You would assign and create a app registration. And at the end of the day, you're going to assign a role within Azure to same sort of thing. You assign a role to the Keeper gateway. That role defines what kind of resources within Azure that Keeper is capable of managing. And in a local environment, really the main thing is that your local environment, you'll need line of sight access from the Keeper gateway to the infrastructure that's being managed. The beauty of the system is that you do not need line of sight access from the vault. All you have to do is deploy the vault. You do not have to have line of sight access from there. So I want to make sure we have some time to go through tunneling. So I'll do that on the Keeper desktop application. And here on the Keeper desktop side, this is really the kind of the differentiator, is that on the desktop application, you have the capability for tunnels. I'm logging into the same vault here, but in this case, I am going to, I'm going to be looking at tunneling capabilities. And so I can filter down to just my tunnels. And in this case, I'm going to actually load up a Linux machine that's running in Azure. So this is my Linux Ubuntu instance that's running in Azure East US. So I can, of course, launch a session into that, but in this case, I want to do a tunnel. And a tunnel allows me to then create a local connection from my local machine through the cloud, through the Keeper gateway to that target infrastructure, all in an encrypted tunnel. And I'm going to start up a few others as well. So I'll start up, let's say this, this guy here. I'll also start up this couple others. So you can, rapid fire, create these tunnels. You can set these up to run when you log in, and it activates. I don't know what that is there. So I've gone ahead and activated this tunnel in this Linux in Azure East US. Now, Once this tunnel is activated, you'll see that I've got a local host name is localhost, of course, and a local port. So this port is selected from the local machine. And if I set it to use the same port every time, it'll use the same port. And it also provides an SSH command. So in this case, I'm tunneling to a Linux machine and I want to SSH using my own tool. I don't want to use, Keeper's UI for doing this, and that's fine. So in this case, you'll see this activated, and built into the desktop application is now a major new feature called the SSH agent. So I can activate an SSH agent directly from Keeper Desktop. And when SSH agent is activated, I can select either on demand, or I can just say, use these SSH keys from my vault. And now SSH keys that are encrypted and protected in my vault can be used by the local operating system to be able to establish these SSH sessions. So all I have to do is run a quick SSH command an export here to add some parameter to my environment variables. And now I can SSH directly from my local host. So I just grab what it gave me, and I'll open up a terminal. So just some terminal on my local device. And if I want to SSH to that target, I could just grab that SSH command. And you can't see this, it popped open on my other screen, but I got prompted if I want to allow access. So I'm going to go ahead and click authorize, and it immediately opened that session to that target. So key aspect here is that I can open a tunnel from my local machine to any target infrastructure over any protocol, and then I can make use of that local application to access that target. So in this case, I was able to SSH to a machine without having to have that SSH key on my local device. It just pulled it directly from the vault. So it's a very specific use case, of course, to be able to use tunnels like this. And in most cases, I would recommend using our connection capabilities. So you have these sessions that are tracked and monitored. But of course, if you have use cases where you want to be able to access a particular resource, but use your own tools for that and not use the Keeper UI for that, we accommodate for that particular use case. And it gives some flexibility around how you access your resources. So in this case, I'm tunneling to a MySQL database, and this is a database that's running in this case, it's running in my California US West environment. And just as another example, so if I want to use my own local tools for that, so I've got MySQL Workbench, so I know that I can just connect to local host and local port 57817. And in this case, I've got MySQL Workbench already loaded up, and I can run that on my local machine. So now it'll connect through localhost, through that encrypted tunnel to the target environment, and I can run queries, directly against those tables. So, flexibility in terms of access, being able to use the UI, being able to use the Keeper UI, being able to use the interactive CLI capabilities, or being able to use browser isolation with web UIs to be able to access the database, or being able to set up a tunnel directly from my local machine and accessing using my own tools. Okay. Any more questions before I keep going?
I have a question about tunneling. Someone's asking, can you tunnel RDP also?
Yeah. So same thing goes with RDP. You would just basically in your configuration, let's say this guy here, I would just go into my record under PAM settings, and I can activate the tunnel. And in this case, I want to tunnel, probably to 3389. And that's basically it. So I can just load up my local RDP client and tunnel to localhost, local port. The key differentiator really from a security standpoint is that we do not man in the middle tunnels. We do not get it. We do not get into the protocol. So what happens there is that when you have a tunnel, you're using your local tools, and we'll monitor in terms of connection and tunnel started and stopped, and those will show up in the event logs. But if you want full session recording and you want, those advanced features of session capabilities, then you'd want to use our built-in session management. So I'll touch on quickly the discovery aspect, because I know a lot of people are interested in discovery, and just kind of quickly talk about what's going on there. So on the discovery side, which you'll see here, currently you'll be able to do discovery. You can do discovery using Commander, and I'll show a few examples of that. And discovery is coming soon on the Vault, so there will be a UI on the discovery side. So you'll be able to activate discovery on that gateway and run the discovery jobs directly through the user interface. That's actually in development right now, so that'll be out very soon. But in terms of the Commander side of things, I'll show you how that works. Here, Commander. So I've got a Commander session that's active. So if you're not familiar with Keeper Commander, this is our CLI. There's a lot of capabilities with Keeper Commander. You can manage your environment, you can import, export data, you can run reports. It can do a lot. So just for example, the new Keeper Commander capabilities is called PAM. So I can say PAM gateway list, for example. That'll give me a list of some of my gateways that are active. Here it shows me that they're online, and I can get additional information about a gateway. So let's say I want to pull info on a particular gateway, I can do that. So there's a lot of useful capabilities of Commander. Anything here can be scripted. You can do it through Python. You can script through our CLI. We have also a PowerShell version of this. I can initiate things like rotation. So let's say under PAM action rotate, for example, I can rotate a password of a record. So this sends that command to the Keeper gateway to go ahead and rotate a password. So I can just say PAM action rotate on a particular record ID, and it schedules that, and it's executing that rotation. If I want to know what's going on with that job, it tells me how to do that, so I can get a status of that job. So then in terms of the discovery side, PAM discovery is also built in. So I've got PAM action discover. So I won't go into a full-on discovery here, but PAM, I should spell that right. How about that? Discover, start. So when I run a discovery, I can run a discovery on a particular gateway. So I can specify just the gateway. And depending on the configuration and depending on the policy, it's going to discover machines, directories, databases, user accounts, local accounts. That's all possible here with discovery. So I can specify a gateway, and in that case, it's going to use the configuration of that environment, and it's going to look at, for example, the CIDR to do a network scan. If it's an AWS environment, it will pull instance role policy to be able to do a scan. Azure, the same thing. So it'll scan in that environment for resources. You can also discover on a particular resource, and one that I was going to look at, let's say that I wanted to discover on, not this one, I want to discover on a resource in the vault, and in this case, I want to discover on a, oh no, I'm looking at the wrong one, discover on a particular gateway and a particular resource. So actually, I'm going to pull up this guy here, which is an Active Directory in my environment. So I've got an AD running in a particular cloud. And this is my Lurey demo.local AD domain controller. So I can do a discovery directly on that domain controller. And when I do that, I can just go ahead and run a discovery. So I'll specify the gateway, which is this one here, and I'll specify the directory, which is this guy here, and I'll execute that discovery. So discovery gets run, it's scheduled, it's queued, it's running by the gateway, and at any time I can run a status. So if I want to see what's going on with that particular discovery job, it'll tell me. And if it finishes, it finishes. So from there, you'll see that the discovery job will then find those resources and allow you to interactively add them into those environments. So in this case, I can pull the discovery process, I can process them, I can add them to my environment. So it'll prompt me to basically add them or skip them or whatever. And these will be added as resources directly in my vault. So at the end of the day, when you are completed with a discovery, you'll get things like here in my, let's say my Azure environment, it'll locate all of my users. So it'll pull out, in this case, Azure AD users. It'll set them up for rotation. So it'll discover IAM users, identities, it'll discover machines. It'll, when you provide the credentials through that discovery process, it'll then drill into those machines to discover local accounts, local services. And it'll also discover things like, you know, AWS identities. So any AWS identity, IAM user will also be discovered if you give it that instance role permission, and those can be scheduled for rotation directly.
This is awesome, Craig. We're at the top of the hour, so I don't know if you have anything else that you want to share before we conclude today's webinar. As a reminder, today's webinar will be automatically sent to everybody who registered in a recording format. You can share with colleagues and rewatch if you would like. And if you would like to book a KeeperPAM demo, I have put the link in the chat, and then we will also be sharing those links via email after the webinar concludes as well. If you have any questions about Keeper at all, you can email customercomms@keepersecurity.com, and we'll connect you with someone who can assist. But Craig, do you have any closing remarks or anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, just feel free to reach out if you have questions. We can go through this. What's coming soon also, I will just briefly talk about. So I mentioned discovery user interface is the next thing that will be launched in PAM. And we're going to be also publishing what we call the notification center. That's going to be a really new area of the product, which will consolidate all of those notifications, workflow, approvals, access deny, access approve. That's all going to be incorporated, as well as some file transfer, drag and drop capabilities within those sessions. So definitely look out for that and look forward to working with you on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time today.